Hello and welcome to the Dragon Fangs Q&A video. I can't think of anything else to say to start, so we're just gonna get right into the questions. The first question is, I'm really curious as to which episode was the most difficult to make. Was it your favorite to make then? And small follow-up, which game session do you feel took the longest to get prepared for? As for which episode was the most difficult to make, it's kind of a two-way tie between the False Hydra video and the False Hydra video. So the False Hydra video was the longest video I had made up until that point, and I think it still is the longest video, because it was about a 12-minute long video, and I did not judge the amount of time it would take me to animate that video correctly, so I thought I'd be done at like 3 AM on Wednesday night like I usually am with my projects. But this took until 5-something AM, and then I started rendering the video, and then I went to sleep for 2 hours, got back up, checked the video rendered properly, then I uploaded it and had to make a thumbnail, description, and all that stuff, and then I went and played board games at a friend's house for like 12 hours after that. So that was quite the day. Those 2 hours of sleep was not enough for 12 hours of board games, and I almost fell asleep while learning the rules for terraforming Mars, but that's really off topic. Anyway, the False Hydra video was my favorite to make at the time, and honestly, I think it still kind of is. Because at the point in time, it was a huge jump in quality from that video to the one before it. I can't remember what the one before it was. I want to say it was my Players Detonated a Nuke, something like that. It was either that one or the Baron Quain video. Either way, there was a huge jump in quality from that video to the False Hydra one, so I was really proud of it when I made it and released it. And even though I've definitely made better videos since then, I think, I still feel like the False Hydra is my favorite because it's kind of its own contained story. Like, it does lead into the rest of the Hunt for the Dragon Fangs series. However, I feel like if you were to watch just that video by itself, then go do something else and never watch the rest of the series, you still had like a complete story right there. As opposed to, for example, Frostfall Episode 1, which is mostly just setting up the rest of the campaign and the story and stuff like that. Or if you watched just one video of any of the videos I've released after False Hydra, you would not be getting a whole story. You'd either be jumping into the middle of a story, or having like part of a story then it ends on a cliffhanger. The only other one that kind of comes close to it would be the False Hydra video, which is kind of its own like mini adventure, because I sort of designed that adventure separately from the campaign, then just found a way to insert it into the adventure while they were going through the Witchwood. But also, that ties into what I was going to say earlier of the False Hydra video was tied for the most difficult video to make, because the actual sessions for that adventure, it was split between 2 sessions where they arrived there halfway through session 13 or 14, then they ended it halfway through the next session. And so I had to prune down like 4 hours of time looping investigations into a 9-minute video that people could watch and still understand while not getting bored. Because during the actual session, they looped through the time loop happening there 5 times, I want to say, and that wouldn't be interesting to watch, really, because it was a lot of the same thing happening over and over again. As the players did have slightly different reactions each time, and it was slowly just like building the atmosphere and stuff like that. However, it wouldn't have made great YouTube content. And while I think I definitely would have adapted it a little bit different if I did it now that I have all this like new experience of making all the videos since then, I still think that was a very difficult one to make, and also one of the ones I'm really proud of as well, because as I mentioned, it's also kind of its own complete story that you can just watch and then do anything else and you still like experience the story. Now, as for the second half of this question, a small follow-up, which game session do you feel took the longest to get prepared for? This one's also a split between 2 answers. I'm really indecisive about things if you couldn't notice. One answer is the False Hydra, obviously. That took 10 sessions of me slowly building up hints to the big reveal. And also I wrote a journal, like I wrote the journal of Marlon Dietrich's throughout the campaign as they were exploring all this stuff. I would write down my pseudo summaries of the session from Marlon's perspective into the journal and date them and stuff. And all of these would be written as if she was actually there with the party. So whenever they get to the end of Marlin's life, they find her book at the beginning of the actual False Hydra session, and they're reading through this, and it's like 8-something pages. And then the slowly dawning realization of, oh shit, what is this? At first they thought there was a ghost following them, and we actually left on a cliffhanger where they found the book, and then they heard a knock on the door, as they were all freaking out of like, who's at the door and stuff, and it was actually just Ozcorus being like, the Westbound Imperium is back. But the players spent a week just being like, what is happening, as they kept trying to figure stuff out, and it paid off super well. That was one of my favorite sessions, but also it took a lot of prep. Then as for the Tide session I prepared the longest for, the episode named Dimensional Destruction, where the players went to the other dimension where I'd run a different campaign a couple years prior, and I had to actually go through and read all of my notes from that campaign to try to make sure I didn't have any inconsistencies in the layout of the city or any of the characters they interacted with for their brief time there. And it was a whole, massive, I read through so many pages of summaries from that campaign to try to make sure everything was accurate. So that one also took a lot of prep, but I think the False Hydra definitely takes the cake on this one. It was a ton of prep, all worth it, but it was a lot of work. Now, I spent a long time answering that question, so I'm finally moving on to the second one. What happened before the False Hydra? So, there were about 10 sessions before the False Hydra happened, where the party was tracking down the first 2 Dragon Fangs and meeting a couple of the NPCs that showed up later. I introduced a few of the villains and stuff pretty early on. They had a few fights with the Westbound Imperium earlier on, so they were really eager to fight them during the actual False Hydra stuff, because they hated the Westbound Imperium by that point. So the problem with these sessions before the False Hydra is that a lot of them were kind of boring. I mean, they were a lot of fun to play through, and I certainly enjoyed them, but a lot of them were also just slowly building up the world and the characters and introducing the campaign stuff before they hit the point in the campaign where everything just kind of starts going crazy, where it's like Demogorgon's showing up and the Oracle's like, the Academy's gonna hunt you down, and the Academy's doing all this crazy stuff. And Hildir is back from the original Winter Crew series, and everything's going crazy. And I feel like the second half of the campaign is just a lot more interesting to watch. So that's why I decided to start the series halfway through the campaign with the False Hydra incident. However, I do think I'm going to do a couple videos of the early stuff, because there's 2 or 3 sessions I think that were really cool and fun and would be able to make their own stories that I could do. Obviously, there's no guarantees, and we're gonna have to see what ends up happening. However, I did actually have basic scripts for a few of these, because originally I was planning to have 1 or 2 episodes in the middle of the series where it's I jump back in time and talk about the time they got Sovereign, or whenever they fought this weird Mind Flayer cult or something, and it's that would have helped build up the characters a little bit. However, I was having a lot of trouble fitting it in structurally, because most of my episodes did end on big cliffhangers. Then it was alright, so the next episode kind of has to build right off of where the last one ended, so I couldn't really find a way to fit them in. But I do still have the scripts for those, and I think I might rework them into being their own individual stories that I can just release, and then I will add them to the bottom of the Dragon Fangs playlist, so you'll still be able to see them and stuff. On to the next question. Can we get the stats for the Dragon Fangs, and can we get more lore on Harvey, please? As for the first half of this, yes. I will be posting the Dragon Fangs stats on the screen right now, I hope. If they're not there, then blame future me, not current me. Current me fully intends on putting the stats on there. But the problem with finding the Dragon Fangs stats would be that I didn't make all of them. Quake and Rot never actually had stats made for them because the party never got them, and I would mostly just kind of make up the stats whenever the party got the item. I'd be like, alright, so this is what the stats are, this is how it buffs all the other fangs, and stuff like that. But anyway, so if I find the stats, I will be posting them on the screen. And on to the second half of this question, can we get more lore on Harvey? Yes, I actually have an entire video planned about his background lore to release probably sometime after Frostfall ends, but no guarantees. And he has actually been in a few old videos of mine, though he went by a different name back then, which I'll explain all of that in the background lore video for him, so you'll be able to look back and realize oh shit, that was Harvey back then doing all this crazy things and stuff like that. So that definitely will be releasing sometime. It might not necessarily be super soon, because I actually have a potential series planned for right after Frostfall ends, of a short Starfinder campaign I ran, because I think that'd be really cool of mixing up a bit and doing like some sci-fi pixel art. But we're gonna have to see. But it's definitely in the works and will release someday. On to the next question. What level were the characters throughout the campaign, especially against the False Hydra and at the ending? Also, what were the enemies' sheets? Did you make them yourself, or were they based in the books? So for the players' levels, they started the campaign at level 1, and they got to level 5 around the time the False Hydra incident happened, so they were level 5 for that. And then the actual series went from level 5 up to level 8, where they fought the Valorian Lord at level 8 and kind of ended the campaign there. As for the enemies' sheets, some of them were from the books, mostly Mordenkainen's Tome of Foes. I absolutely love that book. It is by far my favorite 5th edition book. And then some of the creatures were homebrew creatures I made, or I'd take normal creatures and modify them a bunch to fit the lore of whatever the current creature was, stuff like that. I've always loved adding a lot of homebrew things to my world because it mixes it up a lot, because if it's always just like goblins and orcs and whatever, then it can get a bit boring, especially if you've been playing with this same group for like 3 or 4 years like I had at this point. So they'd fought almost all of the core monsters already, so I wanted to mix it up a lot for them. And this actually gives me an opportunity to talk about one of my favorite parts of the campaign, which is the fact that I didn't have stats for the Valorian Lord ready in time for the fight. I made his entire fight up on the fly, because as the players were sneaking through the tunnels underneath the city to break in at the beginning of episode 10, they actually had an entire little mini-adventure down there, which I thought was going to take a lot longer than it ended up taking, so I didn't think they were going to get to the boss fight that session. And then they did. And then I had to just keep making up the stats on the fly and being like, yeah, so this is one of his abilities now, I guess, and then he can grow wings and fly and build pits and stuff, and I was just trying to like figure all of this out, and that was kind of a mess, but also it worked out really well, so it wasn't the worst thing. But that's still one of my favorite DM moments of like, oh shit, I have to pull this out of my ass real quick and like make it look like it was prepared ahead of time. On to the next question. Was the Westbound Imperium trying to kill the False Hydra, since they were making a bomb out of alchemist fire, just like the heroes later on? If not, what was their goal? Yes, the Westbound Imperium actually was trying to kill the False Hydra, sort of. They were gonna kill the False Hydra by blowing up the entire town and killing everyone there. So they would have either killed the False Hydra or led to it starving, and that was kind of their goal because they knew something funky was going on there, and they wanted to just get rid of all of it. However, they were gonna do it by killing everyone, so like, not the best strategy of doing it, and the party definitely saved a lot of people here. For the next question, it's actually from the False Hydra video itself. How many heads does the False Hydra have? Because it's harder to fight if it has more heads, right? So yes, the False Hydra does get more difficult the more heads it has, however, I'm not really sure how many that one had, because I did the fight really weird. The way you're supposed to do the fight is you decide on the amount of heads the Hydra has, maybe like 4 or 3 or whatever, then you choose a stat block based on that, and then it acts as one monster that fights people. I instead had it where every single head acted like its own creature in the fight, and there were 6 or 7 of them in the fight, and they were all kind of weak and stuff like that, but they'd all sort of damage the main body, but they'd all act on their own initiatives and have different positions on the map. Because the False Hydra had burrowed itself into the ground, and the heads were like breaking out of tunnels and stuff like that to attack the party. And at one point, one of the heads actually dragged a player into the tunnel underneath the fight, and the other players had to like try to pull him back out of there and stuff, and it was a whole thing. So yeah, I don't really know how many heads the False Hydra had during the fight. Now for the last question. Well, I guess it's not really a question and more of a comment. Well, 2 comments anyway, I'll just get into it. I want your art in games, and also, you should make your own game. Well, you might be in luck, because programming games is actually one of my main hobbies, so I might potentially have a project in the works, so stay tuned for info about that when that ends up coming out. Anyway, those have been all the questions for the Dragon Fangs Q&A video, and don't forget, when in doubt, throw an owlbear at the party.